Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Escape Velocity. I'm your host, Tracy Halverson, and today I am joined by Elizabeth Stauderman, who has worked in the worlds of communications and strategy in higher ed and cultural institutions and nonprofits for her career. I was fortunate enough to meet Elizabeth maybe 8 years ago at this point when she was leading the marketing communications at Yale, and we worked together on a website project there, and I've stayed in touch. We have found we share a common love for all things creative, but especially art. And I was really excited to have her join me today, and we'll talk about how our love of art and our appreciation for that kind of informs our lives. So, Elizabeth, thanks for joining
Well,
me.
thank you. I'm excited to be here, but I should tell you that it was not 8 years ago, but rather 12 years ago,
Oh my
maybe
gosh.
13 years ago, because it was 2013, I think, when you and I first connected.
Okay, that makes sense. Wow, my math. I definitely lost about 3 years thanks to COVID.
We all did.
That I know it just has messed up my sense of time. Wow, so 2013. Well, I remember coming up and meeting with you all to talk about the Yale website and just being so nervous and excited and so thrilled to get to work on that project with you and your fantastic team there. And I think it was during those early meetings that we started. I noticed the art that was in your office, and we started. And of course, Yale's MFA program is infamous for what a great program it is for the arts. But give me a little bit. Is there anything else about your background that you would like to share with people who are listening?
Well, I think that it's important for your listeners to know that I come from a family of artists, actors, and painters. And so I think I come by my creative bent and my interest in visual things quite naturally. It's in my DNA. And I don't think that I would have been as successful in my career had I not had that sort of drive to make the world more beautiful. Although many of the graphic designers that I worked with really hated it when I said, couldn't you make it prettier?
Well, that's a very interesting point, right? Because beauty and pretty and visually pleasing is a double-edged sword. Even though we say we want that, then I think it can fall into what feels like maybe decoration or
Right. And
superficial.
that was the objection that many of my partners in crime would bring up. But and they do say that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And one of the things that's important for me to always remember, I hope that I don't give up my principles ever, but when you're creating for a nonprofit or you're creating, especially for higher education institutions, there's a very fine line that you have to walk because your audiences are so broad and their perceptions of beauty and visual effectiveness are so varied, right? And so there's a piece of me that wants to go crazy. And I think that the very wild design that we worked on at Yale together, which, by the way, is still in effect, which for a website is extraordinary. But that is just a testament to you and your team and their vision for how you could create a visual doorway to a very complex institution. And so kudos to you. But the one that we just more recently worked on also is it is visually beautiful, but it's challenging to people who are used to the kind of tired old website that they were used to. And so, although we've launched this project and it's been very successful, the only complaints that we've heard are, I can't find the search button. I don't like it. It's new, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Change is
change
hard.
is difficult, but beauty remains.
Yeah. Beauty is eternal. Well, thank you for that. And I too am very excited about the new project with Skidmore. And it wow, yeah, that is a long time for Yale's site to have held in there. I remember us talking about the idea of the cabinet of curiosities, and when you were sharing with me how generous in spirit Yale is with what it collects, what it adds to its collection, whether that's historic objects or art objects, whatever it might be. They don't lock it away in a vault and only the big donors get a chance to see it, or whatever else. It's immediately shared.
Right. It was really important to be able to showcase that, both the collection and the generosity that allowed it to be shared, the institutional generosity, I think.
Yeah, I think that really became kind of a cornerstone of our strategy for the whole project. And I also very much appreciated that felt baked into the brand of Yale, certainly, but that it touched upon something that I believe in very deeply, which is that, you know, we're not just living in these very linear experiences where, like the show Severance, we kind of block everything else outside of our work life. We come in and we just do work. We're informed and shaped by all the things we experience and learn about or are curious about in the world. And that creates a much bigger and broader kind of landscape of life to work within. Which brings me back to kind of your appreciation for art and how that's informed your life and career. We talked briefly about, before we started recording, about a favorite piece of yours, and so I'd love to start with that, since I know that you've got it
Sure.
handy here, and I'll include a link to this artist's work and maybe a picture on the website
Oh,
once
that'd
we're
be
done.
great.
But
Uh,
tell us a
I
little bit about this.
will show it to you with apologies because it is taken from an angle that you can't really see the delightfulness of it. But it's quite large. It's about 5 feet tall by 4 feet wide. And it was painted by a friend for me, which makes it very special. This particular friend graduated from the Yale MFA program. And when she received her degree, she said to me, "I'd like to paint you something." And I said, "Well, I would like to be, your first client." And so she made this piece for me, and it speaks to many things that I really love. I love sort of organization, I love form. I am, as you can probably tell, very interested in color. And so yeah, she painted that for me, and I've had it since golly, since for a long time. And it has traveled with me from Connecticut to Virginia, back to Connecticut, and then up to New York, where I now live in two different places. And it always stymies the moving company when I show it to them and they say, "Like, you want us to move that?" Well, very important. No,
So this piece, you've had it for a long time. What strikes me about it from the bits that I can see is that it's pieces and then compilations. So it's like parts and then the whole.
correct.
And that strikes me as very speaking to the nature of structure and composition and how things form
Right.
together.
Which is very much
And
what I do, what is done when we put together publications or magazines or brochures or websites or speeches or talking points. It all is the process of gathering together pieces and making a coherent and pleasing whole, if that makes sense.
It does. And while I would say maybe that was the concept, one of the concepts that she was thinking about when she was painting that, and of course, I have no idea, but there's a lot of conversation around on the work side, which I equate to concept, but it's strategy, right? And how important strategy is when you're trying to put together all of these
Right.
things. And I'm curious, as someone who's worked in strategy for your entire career, how do you initially think of it when you're trying to wrap your head around like the starting point and where that strategy needs to start from or kind of be birthed from? How do you think of strategy in your mind?
Well, it's interesting. We were just talking about parts of a whole, creating a whole. But from my perspective, the best strategies start from strong foundation around mission, right?
Mhm.
I think Simon Sinek talks about it as the why, although
Why?
he
Yeah.
might argue that he's not really talking about mission. So, with apologies to Professor Sinek, uh, people mistake they use the word strategy to mean a lot of different things, right? Sometimes a strategy is just like the process to walk out the front door, right? I'm going to
Right.
get up from the chair and then I'm going to go to the door. But if you're talking about trying to develop a broader strategy, the best way to inform the creation of that is you have to understand, let's assume it's an institution, what does the institution stand for? So I think mission and strategy are very tightly tied together. And I would characterize this as being one kind of strategy where you're sitting down and you're going, okay, we're going to build a strategy document to describe a place. Sometimes, if you're doing crisis communications, for example, which I also do, the strategy actually has to be much more, how are we going to fix this problem? How are we going to communicate about it? What are all of the pieces that we need to think about? And then how do we execute on that? So I guess actually it's still the process of assembling various bits of information and making them cohesive, like a painting.
Yeah. So that got me thinking, and I do think it's the why, right? I might make paintings of lots of different subjects, but the why behind wanting to paint and share it is from a more unified, value of connection and sharing an experience that the paint is the only vehicle I know how to convey it. And there's, lots in there. But when you're talking about strategy for a higher education institution, and I've been to and worked with many, many, many over the years. And what I always am struck by and why I always insist on spending some good time
Mhm.
there at the beginning is that each one is truly unique. Their why is very nuanced and very special to them. And then I look at the things that they put out, and it always feels like they've watered it
Yep.
down in such a way that none of that comes through. And I just wonder if that's just sort of like the nature of the industry and wanting to, appeal to all or not be
Yeah, well,
too.
I think there is a real problem in higher education marketing and communications where let's just go old school and talk about a brochure. Right? There are so many brochures, admissions brochures, for example, and they still exist in paper form, where you could take the name of the college or the university out of there and drop in another one, and it wouldn't make any difference. And so the challenge when you're doing great work is not dumbing down that special sauce, whatever it is about the institution. But it's hard for people to articulate it sometimes. They're kind of like, well, I know it when I see it. I know it when I'm here. And everybody agrees, oh, it was so special. But I think there's a difference between, for example, nostalgia and actually what the idiom, is that maybe a good word?
Yeah, or
Ethos
ethos.
of the place actually is. And I've been in enough different places to know that they are very different. We all in higher ed do pretty much the same thing. We teach students and we perform research and we publish research and we send young people out into the world to seek their fortunes. But that's where I think the similarity ends. And I think it's dangerous, especially these days when people are kind of talking about higher education as a kind of monolithic thing. Higher education does X, or higher education doesn't do Y. And I think that's dangerous because there is no single higher education. And we would be well served to think about it in a more nuanced way. But I don't necessarily think that the times allow us to think about nuance a lot, right?
Not these
Right.
days. And yet, and I also, I see the beating that higher ed is taking. Some of the scrutiny is probably warranted, and the conversations around the cost and
Correct.
the ROI and all of that are important, but it does seem that we've fallen into such a limited attention span where we want to see the data that kind of guarantees a certainty. And if I've learned anything in life, it's that the only thing that is certain is that there is no certainty.
Correct. And I do think that I would firmly admit to being a traditionalist, and I believe in education for education's sake. And in fact, that's why I decided to work in higher education. I did work in the private sector, and I stepped out again once in my career to make sure that I wanted to commit to higher education. But I love the transformative nature of it, how you bring people and ideas and things from A to B. It's also an assemblage in some ways, isn't it? And so uh, I I think that when people take too instrumentalist a view of higher education, they're kind of missing the point. Now, I also acknowledge that everybody has to eat. On the
Yeah.
other hand, I don't think that we would be as interesting or successful a society if everyone was a computer scientist and no one was a painter,
Yeah.
right? I did have a conversation with a parent whose child, delightful child, had been admitted to an Ivy League school. And she said to me, I am only going to pay his tuition if he majors in engineering. And he tells me he wants to major in history. And I said, well, I majored in history, and I'll tell you, I can't build a bridge, but I can tell you all the components that need to go into a bridge. And I can tell you about the history of bridges and why this bridge works or bridge doesn't. And I can think expansively about what a bridge actually is. I'm not sure I convinced her. I do think that she left about to tell her child that she was going to pay for an engineering degree and not a history degree, which so you take your defeats and you move on, I suppose.
Good
I
try,
did.
though.
I
Good try.
tried.
Well, I think we talked about this when I was up working with you last year. The way that things are going right now with AI, it seems to me there's never a better time to be kind of one of those Renaissance humans, for lack of a
Mhm.
better phrase. Why I love Skidmore's motto so much, creative thought matters. It's never been more timely. And I think if you look at what AI is going to allow people to accelerate around, it's going to be a lot of that data driven, crunching the information, spitting out the answers to very technical questions, doing a lot of things, writing the code, that the computer scientists used to need to know how to do. And now, what is going to be so valuable is people bringing their learned experiences, their lived
Correct.
experiences that no AI can know of or have, and how those things put together in the mixing bowl of collaboration or the work or whatever it might be will be able to create something unique, something that has not been thought of before through the combinations of those things. So to me, it reminds me of when the web was first getting started, because suddenly there was a real appreciation for people who could come at it with different
Mhm.
perspectives and not just, there was a lot of potential, but that potential was not going to be unlocked purely through learning the skill sets.
Right.
It was going to be through the ideas and the creativity that was brought to bear.
Right. Well, so a couple of things. One, the history of the web as I've experienced it, and I was one of the early developers of websites back in the 90s when all of a sudden we had this tool. As many people in the communications industry will recall, initially, because websites appeared on computer screens, the people who were put in charge of websites were the IT folks. And which is fine because the IT folks need to know how things work. But the analogy, again, the traditional analogy that I made was if you are designing a brochure, we're back to brochures, right? And you want to have it printed. You want to go to a printing company where the man who runs the press, and they usually are men, has been there for 35 years and knows exactly how to get the right cyan and magenta to work to get the picture to pop, right? But you would never ask the pressman to write the content or choose the images. You would ask
Right.
them to make those things real. And so I think, people thought of the website as a technical thing, and I had to keep saying no, 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 it's a communications tool, and it should be communications first on a strong technical platform. And so you fast forward to AI, and one of the things that I think is really important is that, well, let me back up and say I had one of my best bosses for forever, who shall remain unnamed, believed that problem framing was as important as problem solving. Because if you
Oh,
did not,
sounds like
yeah,
Einstein.
right. So if you did not frame the problem properly, you didn't know if you were solving the right issue, right? So problem solving is important, but your problem solving is improved if the framing of the problem is absolutely correct, right? And so
Right.
I think about knowledge workers who use AI right now. They have to write prompts, right? And the prompt, to my mind, is the way the problem is framed. So,
Hmm.
and someone with a liberal arts education, I have argued to a number of people who has a broad experience and who can draw from a range of subjects to see how they all might fit together. Again, we're talking about the assemblage of pieces,
Yeah.
has the kind of broad perspective that makes the prompt better because it's more comprehensive, right? And, this isn't a subject by any stretch of the imagination. There's a um, ancient Harvard Business School article that talks about T-shaped managers, T-shaped leaders. The idea being that they have at their core some foundational knowledge about a subject, but they also have the top of the T where they can reach out, excuse me, and they have people skills and they know how to talk to people, and they don't just transfer their knowledge, right? What I just said may be wacky, but I actually think there's a grain at least of truth in it.
I think so too. And I think, you've spent your career managing and working with teams of people. So how do you feel like do you feel like your appreciation and enjoyment and, often travels to see art and museums, does that inform that T shape for you in how you work with others?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. First of all, leading a team or being part of a successful team has always been an incredibly high priority for me. So professionally, I've always sought out places where there are good teams. That is when I get
Yeah.
my greatest job satisfaction. And when I became a leader, to see my team succeed is the best success story that I can have. It's not about me, it's about the team. And if they succeed and they feel good about that success, right?
Yeah.
But it's interesting so two things. One is it's now a pretty standard practice, but back 20 years ago or so, it was quite innovative that the Yale Medical School sent its students over to the art gallery to look at a painting, to learn observational skills. In so doing, the idea was, and I think it's been proved, that they now can observe their patients in a more sympathetic way, right? They see more things. They look at a painting and realize, oh, that it's a component of a lot of different things, right? And so when I first became the chief communications officer at Yale, the first thing I did as a team building exercise was I marched everybody over to the Yale Center for British Art, which is one of the museums at Yale. And we sat and we looked at part of their wonderful collection, not only to help them do something together, but also to look closely at something and reflect on that. And also to talk about and see the richness of the Yale collection. I had the curators dig some stuff out of the archives to look at, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sort of going around here, but I do think that uh, you you must you must include some element, or you must insist upon some element, or permit, maybe is a better word, some element of creativity in almost every aspect of work, right? Sometimes there's a yes no answer. And if you look over my shoulder at the two black and white pieces, that's all about typography. And typography is all about sort of binary yes no in these particular cases. But this one over here is actually a comma that's been manipulated, right? So there's where it's creative, and there's space for both of those things. And so sometimes you have to make that choice. Maybe it's a budget issue that only gives you $2 when you'd like 2,000. Although I will say budget constraints create their own kind of creativity, right? You really
They
need to
do.
figure out what you can do with a roll of twine and some scotch tape. And it's
Yes.
amazing what, if you let yourself be creative and you think this isn't just a roll of twine and some scotch tape, why it's a piece of macrame, right? That I taped to the wall. So I'm not sure I'm really answering your question, but I do get really excited about the interest in encouraging observational creativity in the folks that I work with.
Yeah, and I think it is critical in every facet of our lives to nurture that creativity. So many people just say, "Oh, I'm not creative. I can't even draw a stick figure." And I'm like, "Okay, let's move past that. That's not you're missing the point here." Because I do think everyone is creative and it's a core aspect to just our existence. I don't think it's not about a skill or a hobby or a talent. I think it's a way of operating that is just as core to our existence as, emotions, feelings. I remember in high school being given an assignment to do a series of paintings using a limited palette, very limited palette. And I love all my colors and all my tubes of paint. And so I was huffing and puffing like most of the other painters in the class. And and the my teacher, Walter Bartman, said very similarly, it is not about the lack of, it's about what you can do with what you've got, and to make something magical out of it no matter what. Maybe it's 2 colors, 3 colors, whatever. And then at the end of the work, I remember he let us all know that this was actually Rembrandt's full working
Oh,
palette.
interesting.
It was our limited palette, and, that gave us all a lot to think about, of course.
Well, in in graphic design, I don't know if this is still the case, but certainly in the Yale graphic design program, the young would be designers were put through their paces with a bottle of white placa and a bottle of black placa, and they were supposed to be like Armin Hoffman, the famous Swiss graphic designer, and recreate an image from simply light and shadow. Um, I went through that exercise and failed miserably, I'm afraid.
But still a
Well,
valuable
it was, right?
exercise.
It shows
Yeah.
you about form and it shows you about components. We seem to have a theme here about components and putting them all together.
Mhm. Well, it also makes me think about, I think one of the things I experienced as an early painter that just hooked me, and I couldn't kind of I just wanted that feeling of discovery again and again, but it was when I discovered the power of negative
Oh,
space and, painting what's not there to reveal what's there in a way that just, was magical to experience. And to me, these are things that apply to life and even, problem solving. We look at we get so focused in on the literal or what we think is right in front of us that we sometimes forget that it's maybe what's not there is just as important in how we're thinking through the problem or the challenge.
right. Well, it's interesting. I think of myself pretty much as a maximalist in terms of my taste. And yet, one of the images that I remember most from when I was younger was an ad campaign that Irving Penn did for Clinique. And you may remember they were the most beautiful, simple pictures of a bottle, right? And it was it was all about putting yourself in all of that delicious empty space, right? I mean, obviously it was trying to sell a product, but the photos were so wonderful in their simplicity and in leaving so much space for the viewer. And I still remember those. They were quite something.
Yeah, I think simplicity is very, very
Yes.
hard to achieve. Much, much harder than I think people give it credit for. And, pulling things away until you only have what's necessary. But having that be enough to do whatever it is you're hoping to
Well,
convey. Um,
that's sort of what developing a strategy is all about, is stripping it all the way down to the point, right? And
yeah,
so, everything's connected.
everything is connected, which is why I have faith that the liberal arts will survive and hopefully thrive in the future.
I hope so. I think they're essential to um, creating an informed citizenry. But I also think, higher ed isn't for everyone. And I, need to be very clear about that. And I think that there has been this kind of myth, which is being debunked right now, about how really the only path was 4-year college. And there were statistics that basically said a college wage earner will earn more over the course of their life than a high school graduate or a trade school graduate. And I think that those statistics still hold true, but they're slowing and they're
Yeah,
merging. And there was a recent article about how the sector of unemployed college graduates is growing at a larger pace than others for people who are taking a look at unemployment. And that all sounds very dismal. And then, of course, what the students here are talking about and their parents are talking about is whether or not AI is going to take away what would normally have been their first year analyst jobs, their first job out of college, which would be being some kind of an analyst. My response to that is I go back to the point I was making about it's how you use AI and how creative you are about that and how broad your knowledge is to bring to framing a problem for AI to solve. I mean, I'm happy to have ChatGPT fill out a spreadsheet for me,
yeah. It's me too.
right?
I'm happy for it to run numbers and it creates a lot of efficiency. It allows me to do a lot more than I could normally, but it is not where I go for as a source,
Right.
right? It's not a source. It's a great accomplice to getting things done more efficiently. And I think it can be a good place to be challenged around ideas or to poke holes in things or to I'll often ask ChatGPT to assume the role of, maybe a certain author or thinker and ask them to then challenge an idea that I might be considering or help me see different perspectives. And I think all of that is great. But I am curious to see how the next few years do go for the early job, the early career jobs.
I think it's going to be worth watching, and it makes me very happy that I am no longer in my early career.
Same. And it same. And it makes me think a lot about the positions that we are hopefully able to create more and more of as our company grows and how we are able to bring people in who don't have any experience and who still can, get their foot in the door and be useful, and maybe useful in more meaningful ways than doing some of that rudimentary or automatic technical work that the AI can do. So we will see.
Yeah,
We will
I
see.
and doesn't it take a little bit of it takes risks on your part and bravery on the part of a youngin who may have great ideas but doesn't know how to bring them to the table, or maybe doesn't believe that their ideas, because they are not, the based on 20 years of experience, that they're not great, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, as you grow your company, it'll be interesting to see the types of people who are looking for those kinds of jobs. And you know I always like listening to the younger folks in my office, because they have perspectives and experiences that I would never have thought of, right? These digital natives who work in apps and perhaps spend too much time on a screen. But there's a whole world that the olds like me don't necessarily understand as context for decision making or for idea making. And that's why I rely very heavily on some of the younger folk in my office. Like, what do you think? And often they look at me like, do you really want to know what I think? And I'm like, yes, I really do want to know what you think based on your experience and, the things that you do. Because I can say, oh, this is the answer to the question. And it could be the answer to the question to everybody else in my demographic, but I'm not the only demographic out there. So when you're being a creative, when you're developing a strategy, I mean, you have to start thinking about, I guess it's really as simple as thinking about your audiences, but audiences can be inputs as well, personas, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always been a proponent of the idea of diversity in thinking, diversity in backgrounds, experiences, opportunity, access. Just the more diversity you can bring to a challenge, I think the better.
Right,
And so, we have some Gen Zs at the office, and we've been talking a lot about that generation and what they've gone through and how they've experienced certain things that are transformational, but they're going to impact them in a different way than they're impacting people who are in their 30s or
right,
40s or 50s, or or still in preschool. And it's it, to me, it's just more voices and everything is
right.
perspective, right? And I think it's real short-sighted to think that just because you have the age or the time in the seat and the experience, that makes your perspective more valuable.
Right. I agree. And again, lots of different pieces, components that you're putting together. I believe, and I'm sure that there are plenty of stories written about this, but the pandemic has affected this generation of college students and young workers, just like the Great Depression affected 2 generations ago, right? That
Mhm.
the profound difference, and the depression and the pandemic were in many ways about scarcity, right?
Yeah.
Scarcity of money, scarcity of human interaction, a scarcity of experience when you couldn't go outside, right? And it'll be interesting to see. I do think that when people talk about the greatest generation and the folks who experienced the depression and went through World War II, that was that generation built a significant portion of the America that I certainly was raised in. I'm just talking about the US right now. So, what is that? What's the pandemic going to do, which was a global thing? What's the pandemic going to do to um, future decision making, when we're no longer around to make the decisions?
Yeah. Or we're at the mercy of those decisions
Correct.
because you
Right.
know. Yeah, I think about that a lot. But that scarcity of human interaction that the pandemic created and what that what that did to people, and then this immersion into a world full of, the TikTok world and the short form video and the social media and the misinformation. What a w what a combo.
Yes. I was wondering, as a visual artist, what do you think about? I find it. I've taken several of these quizzes to say, is this real or is this AI? And I have to say, I don't do very well. And I wonder, how you think about the impact of AI on the visual world, on art, on photography, on the things that are components of great websites or other sorts of things.
I mean, that's a meaty one. I think that, is this real or is this AI is partly a problematic question to be starting with. And our knee-jerk reaction to, fearing that our experience of our reality is going to become meaningless because somehow if a code can replicate a representation of so-called reality in a believable enough way, that then that has no meaning anymore for artists to depict it. But I would say that every fine artist and really anyone who's, I think, trying to communicate, whether it's through language or the visual arts or music, there is there is an aspect of the individual experience and expression that is woven into that. It's very hard to explain it or break it down into zeros and ones. But I think that whether AI can create amazing paintings that rival the great contemporary painters of today, I don't know. If it can, so what,
Right. Well, I
right?
fully think that there's going to be a whole, you had the abstract expressionists and you had the impressionists, and pretty soon you're going to have, maybe you already do. So this may exhibit my ignorance. You're going to have the people who make fine art with intent using artificial intelligence, right? And actually, the intent piece is really an important piece because I think you can have malicious intent, which is to confuse in a bad way or lead people to make bad decisions. But there's
Right.
also a way to
Misappropriate. Yeah.
create, using AI, if you're using AI creativity in a way that is intended to be beneficial. Although, what's beneficial, that also, is a philosophical question that's a different podcast, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I as an artist who primarily worked in paint, I've created imagery using my iPad and a tablet and digital tools. I've created still lives to make physical paintings inspired from where the imagery was generated by AI. I love the idea that I could create video without the equipment and technical know-how that that I might have needed prior, but that's no different than realizing I could, plug in my little quick cam in 1997 and create stop motion and then edit it in After Effects, which I downloaded probably illegally from the internet and figured out how to, use on my own during grad school. And I could add, a thunderstorm. I could manipulate and create in ways that were previously unobtainable because of the cost or the skills that I needed to know or the production budget or whatever it might be. So I think it's what's more interesting to me is the access to create
Hmm.
that the generative AI is unlocking for people. But if they're using it to create, if the intent is just to do it or malicious or to deceive or misinform, then I think, that's the challenge that's always been
Right.
there.
And it's going to get to a point where we aren't going to know whether it's a deep fake or uh, a shallow fake.
Yeah, I think that will be interesting when there's enough going on to where we start to question, it's like people that question the moon landing. Are we going to start to question whether our news anchors are real people sitting there on the TV giving us the information? Are we already at that point? That just is we could do a whole nother podcast series on, reality
Right. Right.
and and what that really is, which does bring me back to art because I think that the tangible, if you listen to music, it's not a thing in front of you, and you have to experience it over time. Can you say you've listened to the piece of music if you've only listened to a little slice of it? You can never listen to a piece of music in that 1 second, split second that you can look at a piece of
Right.
artwork. And how those things impact you over time is I think all again sort of core to our human existence, and it's what feeds us. So I don't know that there. I think there might be a lot of empty calories and a lot of oh wow,
Right.
and then we'll hopefully move past it.
Yeah. Well, and also, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's kind of like you do not experience a painting by simply walking by it, right? And this is all about the observation of what's going on in the painting. You know, what what do you see? What do you not see? What's the impression that it gives you? And it takes more than a split second to really, I think, to really make that experience of looking as valuable as it can be, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense, and I think it'll again. I think in time it will be interesting to see if that experience of looking is truly something that people return to and appreciate. You know, I have traveled to amazing places as a tourist, and you run around and you try to see the sights, and then I've traveled to amazing places as a painter, and the point is to sit and look
Hmm.
at the mountain all day. And it's just, the random mountain that you found that you decided you were going to paint that day. And it's a very different experience to sit and stare at something over time. And obviously, in nature, the light changes, the weather changes, you change as you're painting it. And, people still go to museums when the Monet shows come through, and they may have a calendar in their kitchen of all of those paintings. They can look at those pictures all day, every day if they want to, but they're drawn to come and be able to be in the presence in real life with a
Right.
painting and stand before it and experience it in time. And I think that that's hopefully something that we don't lose, because I think that it's something that we we get to do and appreciate.
Right. There's in a past life, I had to go to a business meeting in Chicago, and it didn't start till the afternoon, and I intentionally took the earliest possible flight so that I could go to the Chicago Museum of Fine Arts and sit in front of the Seurat painting for half an hour before I went to my meeting. It was perfect. I'm talking about the, Saturday morning in the park. I
Yeah.
can't pronounce the Grand Jatte. And I'd only seen it in books, and I had this drive to see it in person and to experience it in person. And I have to tell you, it was transcendent. And I took that business meeting, which was, a contentious presentation about um, a project that wasn't going well. I was walking on air, and I found that I had this sense of calm. Things had come together. I didn't yell at anybody. I really was so jazzed by the time that I spent just sitting and observing and learning, right? Although I can't tell you exactly what I learned, it's, I mean, this is neither here nor there, but that experience was profound for me.
I can imagine. I've been able to see some of my, favorite paintings in real life. A lot of my favorites are the old masters, and Rembrandt's Night Watch, or the Raft of the Medusa, and some of those epic paintings that I studied in art history. And when I got to the Louvre in Paris and got to walk up to these paintings that are massive in scale, and to just be able to get up and look at the brush strokes on the foot of the corpse that's floating in the water beside the raft. And I mean, there was so much there was just so much to experience, and then to step back and just see it in its size. And granted, all the people mulling around was a little bit annoying, but
It's better when you have the museum all to yourself.
yeah,
I,
yeah.
it's interesting. This red piece behind me, which you can't see very well, but and by the way, it's the Chicago Art Institute, not the Museum of Fine Arts, but it is the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. And one day I happened to journey into the museum in Boston, and there was a massive painting by an artist named Cleve Gray, who is an abstract expressionist.
Hmm.
And it was, I don't know, 30 feet long and 8 feet tall. And it was this amazing color field painting. And I was so captivated by it that as soon as I got home, I got my color aid out and I tried to reconstruct it. And it's falling apart. The rubber cement doesn't last forever, apparently. But it was one of those things where I just had to somehow or other try to bottle whatever it was that I had seen. And, maybe it's inspiration, but, my positive reaction to that kind of observation, I think I carry through to work that I produce, but also bigger work that I produce for the work that I do.
Just to kind of bring it full circle, since you just mentioned work, when you're working on a brochure or a
There's that
strategy,
brochure again.
or I know I had to bring it, back. How much do you rely on your gut reaction to things when you're looking at something, or you're even reading something? Because I think we all can, just the first time you see something is going to be the first time you see it, and then you'll never have another first time of seeing it. But do you try to tap into paying attention to what those early inklings are, or do you give them much validity?
Yeah, it's very rare that I don't have a strong opinion about something. You gut reaction, something resonates. I have found it extremely easy, perhaps easier than other folks throughout my career, that when I'm picking images or I'm picking writing to, or editing, right? Editing writing to go with what most resonates with me. And hopefully, because of my liberal arts education and some of my artistic DNA, I hope that I'm making the right choices, right? And
Right.
yeah, I rarely go, well, it could be that, it could be the other. I generally have really strong opinions, but not everybody works that way. But for me, it's always been take a risk, don't take too much of a risk. You want people to read and see what you're presenting, especially if you're writing about a place. You don't want them to just be turned off by whatever it is that they see. And so that's the frame that I look at things. And then, there's color and all that sort of thing, and composition. But the short answer to your question is yes, I make decisions quickly, and it's generally based on a gut, which I hope is an
Yeah.
informed gut, right?
Well, yeah, and I mean, it is. I just think many people don't give their they don't nurture that gut and make sure that that's an informed, gut reaction. But even if it is an informed gut reaction, I think a lot of people second guess it, or they don't listen to it as much. But it's a conversation, so I think, you wanna be able to carry the very beginnings of your experience of something along as you then might scrutinize it from different perspectives and for different reasons, holding on to that initial response and what it was about that is so important, I think, because yes, to you want something that's gonna resonate and have a similar gut reaction, assuming that's a positive reaction. But, we don't remember things if they don't impact us a certain
Right.
way. And if, back to the conundrum of higher ed marketing looking all the same and not taking risks, it's leaving people with very little to hold on to, in terms of differentiation. And you can't really make someone hold on to something if you don't give them something tangible to differentiate in their
Correct.
minds. And
Well, and that's why brand and brand strategy is increasingly so important to folks in higher ed, and in some ways, it is for the traditionalists. The idea that you have to market higher education is extremely challenging. I mean, up until a very short while ago, marketing in higher education was kind of a bad word, or
yeah.
in the elite realm, right, of higher education. Oh, we don't do that.
Right. Well, marketing, that word is one, it's the cousin of sales, and nobody wants to feel like they're
Right.
selling.
But the reality is that we are, especially in higher ed, where you've heard of the demographic cliff, and the fact that there are fewer 17-year-olds than there have been in the past. And so the available cohort of customers, if you will, is shrinking. And so the competition is getting fiercer. And as we've seen, within this industry, if you will, so many consolidations, closures,
Yeah.
and people predicting closures. Um,
Yeah.
if you could solve the problem of the cost of of a liberal arts education, and make it something that didn't have $100,000 a year price tag, you would be a genius. People would flock to you. But I don't. I think the reality is that's never going to happen. Although, there's
No.
some innovators who've said, well, you do it all online and you only pay as you go and, this and that. But from a traditional standpoint,
Yeah,
we have to respect the fact that what we're selling isn't potentially as palatable as it maybe once was, not as
absolutely.
aspirational as it once was.
Yeah. I keep waiting for one of these, billionaires to step in and help solve some of these problems, but they seem to be more interested in going to Mars or taking over the universe or whatever they're
Yes.
up to.
Although there are philanthropists out there who are really trying hard to figure out this higher education model in a way that makes some sense. Um, but
Yeah,
maybe part of the
it
fun
would
is
be
it doesn't make a lot of sense. It just is. And, you can have a public good without uh, any particular justification. It can be a good, right?
yeah.
I maybe I could be naive there, but I'll always be a cockeyed optimist uh, about higher ed.
Well, eh, I wanna wrap it up on that note because I also that made me think about, your bio, and you end your bio on LinkedIn with a quote. Is it an Emerson quote that nothing great was ever accomplished without enthusiasm?
Correct. Favorite
So
thing.
tell me about enthusiasm and why, that resonates with you.
Um, I think enthusiasm is an outward demonstration of the fact that you believe in what you're doing. It's confidence, but it's also positive. And so it's less of a swagger and more of a skip, if that makes any
I
sense,
love it.
right? And
Yeah.
I, part of it is my personality has evolved to be um, the kind of person who tries to always think about the glass being half full. I'm the, hey, let's put together a show in the barn. I'll make the costumes kind of person. And so that quote just resonates with me, and it resonates with others as well. I'm not unique in picking that as a sort of driver, but I think it's really important. Drudgery doesn't get you the greatest it may get you a product, but I'd always go for crafted as opposed to workmanlike, if that makes any sense.
It does, it does, and I love the word enthusiasm over, positivity or optimism because it's not about hope and it's not about, blind faith.
Correct.
You really can't have the enthusiasm if you don't care about what you're doing. So,
Right.
here's to hoping that we all can continue doing things we care about and, making the world a better place,
I'm with you.
or at least trying to enjoy it while we're here.
Correct.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me, and this was a great conversation, and I hope we can do it again soon.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. It was fun to ramble about.
It's always fun to
I
ramble about.
know. Um,